You recently wrote an article about an outsider's view into American youth ministry. And I wanted to kind of talk to you a little bit about what you see. And so if you would answer a few questions that some people here in the States might have, being from the UK. So the first one that comes from your article, it says, you believe the American church is God's gift to the global church. Would you kind of talk a little bit about what you mean by that statement?
Sure. Melissa, my wife and myself, we travel a lot around the world, and we see a lot of what's going on in the world, and it's fascinating actually just how much of what is going on in the world is driven from here in the States. I mean, if you go to Poland and you see a new church being set up in an old disused cinema, you go to Africa and you see some amazing people doing amazing things there. And in the UK, our leadership team in the UK is 3/4 of American. And every time we see young people come from America with a real passion in their heart for Jesus and consequently a real fruitfulness in their lives, we do thank God for what He's given us from America.
And we do have the missions teams, and you talked about those a little bit about...
Amazing numbers. Do you know they reckon about 600,000 people every year go on mission from here in the States? We have 3 partner works in Africa, and they're beneficiaries of all that.
With all that being said, there are still some issues that the American church you see as a weakness, as some things we need to address. What do you think our biggest weakness is?
Jesus told this parable about someone who buried their talent. You know, he'd given them a lot, and he was scared with what he had, so he buried them. I'm not sure the American church is scared of its talents. I think largely it's unaware and it's burying its talents. And Jesus also said, to him to whom much is given, much is expected. And I think there's a huge challenge for the American church. You have resources, you have so much. Most young people being raised through the American church have a far better education, Christian education, than most pastors in Africa. And if you take those sorts of thoughts and statistics and you begin to ponder what that means, I think actually there's a huge responsibility. But let's take it positively. I mean, there's this massive potential, particularly in this young generation growing up with so much potential in their understanding of what faith's about, so much zeal, so much passion. I wonder whether the American church really understands what it's got. And for me, I want to look at it very positively. I want to say, hey, come on guys, wake up. There's more to life than what's going on in your, not only in America, but I would say your biggest problem is that very often your worldview doesn't extend outside the actual church walls itself into the wider community. And I was even hearing just now actually that America is up there in the top 4 most unreached countries in the world, simply because you've got this vast unreached population. It's a big country. But what are you doing about that? What are you doing about the world? What are you doing with these resources? What are you doing with all this potential? It's wonderful. It's exciting. Get on with it.
George Barna says that 4% of the next generation will be churched. We've done a poll and survey in Lee County here and found that 10% of our students go to church. 10% out of 40,000, we're only reaching, and on our best night, we only have 12% of our teenagers going to church.
Okay,
college students, we're only reaching 0.03%. What's the missing ingredient that we're missing? Why is this such a negative side to the American culture?
But can I just put that into some form of context?
Okay.
In Europe, we'd be lucky to get 2% go to church. There are countries in Europe, there's a country called Slovenia in Europe, standard of living pretty similar to America. We don't know of one single evangelical born-again Christian in the whole country. Not one. If anyone can tell me of someone, we'd love to see them. So if you know of anyone, let us know. Now that's the context in which you're working. So it's not just an American problem. It's actually a global problem. And again, to put a positive spin on this, if you got 10%, you have got the most amazing opportunity to influence that 10%. The question is, are you teaching these guys what they really need to hear? In other words, are you giving them an authentic gospel, or are you giving them some sort of watered down gospel which will, in desperation, I want to hold my 10%. So basically I'm going to bury my talent, I'm going to bury what I've got, I'm just going to hold on to them, whatever the cost, I'm going to give them whatever they want because I don't want to lose them. Or are we saying, actually, I don't care if I lose you, I want to give you the truth and give it to you in such a way that if I lose some, the ones we'll keep will go and reach many, many more.
You've also mentioned in your article that it's probably comes from not just the youth pastor, but probably the culture of the church.
Yeah.
You talked about that. Why do churches hire youth pastors? That are they hiring to babysit the kids they have, or are they hiring because the church actually has a genuine, we want to reach people? Is there a difference in the UK, or do you see some things in the US that lead to this problem?
Do you know, it's a funny thing, the UK, US. In some ways, we're ahead of you, in other ways, we're behind you. And we can learn so much from one another. This is why we need to look out and have these sorts of conversations. I think we're behind you in this, but catching up very rapidly, in that it's almost needed now for a church to have a youth pastor. Partly because the church is too busy. You don't get the volunteer help that you used to, but partly because actually everyone else has one, so we'll have one. And very often the motivation to have a youth pastor is certainly not to reach the lost, but it's because parents are scared of losing their kids, so they go to the church, say, we'll fund it, you find someone, you get them to look after our kids. Rarely, though, is that a successful strategy. Because actually what in fact happens is this poor young youth pastor comes in, and he either does one of two things. He either gives the kids what they want, which, as I say, tends not to be too beneficial for them in the long term, or gives them a true, actual, authentic gospel, and they don't like it. They go back to their parents and say, I don't want to go there anymore. Parents go to the pastor and say, or the elders, and say, hey, hang on, what's this youth pastor doing? We're not going to salary him anymore. We're not going to tie to the church. We're going to employ someone like that. And off he goes after 9 months, and they get another one in who plays ball, who gives the kids what they want. But that does not, as your statistics already back up, that does not sort of prepare those young people, those high school kids, for college life. And you may hold them through high school, but then they're off the end, because actually all they've had is an entertainment culture. All they've had is a feed me type mentality.
Not the personal relationship that it requires.
Absolutely not, no.
One of the suggestions that you gave, and actually in Lee County we're doing, I think, a better job than most there. We have a youth pastors network, and we're building that. Yeah. That was one of the answers you gave, that we need to build together interdenominational and parachurch ministries with churches. What are some other suggestions, and how do we do that?
Well, first of all, can I say I was so excited to hear about that, Jason. I mean, that actually is quite avant-garde in America. I mean, it's sad, isn't it, really? Yeah. I mean, for goodness sake, we're serving the kingdom. Right. In fact, Jesus says, well, you build the kingdom and I'll build the church, basically. We get so busy building the church that the kingdom actually gets sort of forgotten. But getting together is actually really important. Getting together, thinking together, serving one another. We have this wonderful phrase that we use in our ministry called preferring one another in love. And that means that if one person it says, look, I'm actually going to prefer all your ministries to mine, he can be secure because he knows that the others in fellowship with him are preferring his ministry to theirs. Now that to me is a kingdom mentality. That's a heaven mentality. A hell mentality is look after myself. And what we've got into in our church culture, in our youth ministry culture, is that hell mentality, which says, I'm gonna fight for myself. Right. A giving mentality which just says I'm just gonna prefer all of you guys, and that's the one which I believe bears fruit. That
really requires a lack of ego. That you really have to put aside who you are.
Yeah, but yeah.
Churches, we've done a very good job, and I think a lot of our youth pastors here would say we've decided that it doesn't matter where people go to church. Yeah. Until everybody in our county is going to church, then we'll worry about where they go. Yeah. In the UK, do you see that kind of mentality, that people are laying down their egos saying, hey, we'll reach the masses, or are they still behind that curve?
The UK church has many, many faults, but the one good thing I think we have going for us is a heart of partnership, which says just that. If young people go to church, well, actually, no, can I rephrase that? If young people come to know Christ personally and intimately, we just praise God. And we're getting there. We're still a long way from it. I mean, the Christian youth ministry scene in the UK is political as it is everywhere. But actually, I think that's the one thing we can probably give the world at the moment. And again, I would just so encourage. I just wonder what would happen. I mean, I'm being idealistic now, but why not, hey? What would really happen if we were able to lay everything down and just say, come on, guys, let's just really see what God can do now? Because you say lay down your ego, but isn't that the gospel again? You see, how can we tell kids the gospel when we're not living it? If our lives are saying this is all about me, about my ministry, about that's not the gospel, is it? Jesus said it is the Pharisees, the Gentiles who lord it over one another. And unless we're actually demonstrating it, the kids will see right through it.
Yeah, I've heard it said that if the church would just act like the church, imagine what would happen.
Indeed.
Okay, so we know that we have this struggle, and we've talked about a couple of... What is the one key, biggest thing that you see hindering the church in America? We've got all these resources, we've got all the things. Maybe there's more than one, but if there was one that you had to pick out that says, this is the Achilles heel of American youth culture, youth ministry, is there one that you'd point to?
Oh, gosh. It's hard to put it down as one. We've covered a little bit, about the ego, and we've covered the whole thing about sort of almost treating young people as pawns for our benefit. In other words, we're not here to serve them, but they're here to sort of boost our numbers, bolster our ministries, and I think that's really serious. The other one, though, I'd like to highlight, Jason, is fear. I think sometimes we're so scared about trying anything new. We're so scared about stepping out, and we've got to try something new because what we're doing is failing. And unless we do, and what's wrong with failure, actually? I mean, if we step out and if we try something, it doesn't work, well, we can try something else, can't we?
The Bible's very clear that God always is doing something new. Is fear the only thing that keeps us? I mean, is there a generation difference that keeps us from doing new things? Is there something that the more older generation I talk to, they're fueled by the energy of the younger generation, but yet we don't see churches moving in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, well, again, I think we've already covered a little bit of this in that you've got this huge potential. You say only 10% of school-age kids go to church. Well, again, I don't want to use that phrase, go to church. I want to use that phrase, personal, intimate relationship with Christ. But what a huge resource pool, and you're quite right. At that age, they're very often idealistic.
Right.
Very often, they just want to go for it. They've got little to hold them back. They haven't got the mortgage worries. They haven't got the whatever. They're ready to go for it. I think part of our trouble is that we do put them on a leash because we're scared of either losing them or what they might do. And actually, we need to take some responsibility and say, let's let these guys go for it. I think one of the biggest frustrations and perhaps one of the biggest drawbacks in youth ministry is that young people take their lead from us. And they look at us and they see a box and they see this is what the Christian faith is, this is what the church is, this is how we do it, this is how we live life. And I hate to say it, but what example are we setting them? Is that really what holds them back? They look at us and they don't see it.
But also as individuals.
As individuals, yeah. I mean, it's a huge challenge. But again, let's turn that challenge on its head. Let's not dwell on the negatives. Let's say, what if then? What if I was actually able to set that positive example in humble service, love, in faithful stepping out, taking risks for the kingdom, just letting God be God? And what on earth could that do for those young people? I mean, how could it set them alive? And could that be, we're in such a desperate state, we might as well try it. We've got not much to lose really.
You talked about some of the countries that have no Christians. Are you seeing a change in the UK? We hear all the time about the state of the UK that it's really more secular than anything else. Are you seeing a positive change at all?
No. I'm seeing some little flashes of light. We've got some good things going on. But generally speaking, no. I think as a church we've lost our heart for evangelism. In youth ministry we've become very professional and the means becomes the end. In other words, if you do a good job, put on a good show, that's good. Actually, it's not good, not unless we really are impacting young people for Christ. Across Europe, it is desperate, Jason. Absolutely. And this is one of the reasons we're here, is because we need Americans to come to Europe. And we also need America to have a good, long, hard look at Europe and see that unless you buck your ideas up, you're going to be where we are. And there's one or two little places, Ukraine, there's some really exciting things going on in the Ukraine. But actually, generally speaking, it is desperate.